Spanish fleet of Bouchons that was assembled by Spitfire Productions Limited, having recently been retired by the Spanish Air Force in 1968. But here, going after them, the RAF, the number 19 Squadron Veteran Spitfire 1A from the Imperial War Museum's collection, and the Comanche Fighters Spitfire 1A. Disused airfield, an enormous fleet of Spitfires and Bouchons, a handful of Hurricanes, and several Casa 211s representing the Heinkel HE-111 fires, about to run in to engage our Spanish Messerschmitts. Germans called a freie Jagd, a free fight, and bounce their opponents from altitude. So single-seater on the grass in the hands of Steve Jones, and the Spitfires were flown there by John Gowdy and Stu Goldspink. Other than night, just hours after the Dams raid, a B-17F flying fortress named Memphis Belle, belonging to the 91st Bomb Group, took off from its base at Bassingbourn, not far west of Duxford, for a raid against German U-boat pens in the French port of Lorient. When it returned safely, its regular pilot, Captain Robert K. Musks of the Daylight Campaign, his 25th operational sortie. At the time, the odds of doing that were less than 40%. 2 days later, Memphis Belle itself completed its 25th mission. Those were just two of the examples of considerable heroism against the odds that the No matter what the differences were between their mounts, though, the heroism of their crews was immense, as was their sacrifice. Some 120,000 people served in Bomber Command during World War II, of them 55,000. But running in now for its solo display in remembrance of the 8th Air Force as ever, B-17 Sally B. This privately owned and most incredibly potent flying memorial to the United States airmen who served in particular in East Anglia during the Second World War carries still on one side of its nose the nose art of Memphis Belle, the 91st Bomb Group aircraft that achieved that notable milestone 80 years ago, and which was of course the subject of William Wyler's wartime documentary chronicling the progress towards that epoch-making mission.
island of the towns and cities, whose people have defended their island's freedom for over 1,000 years. But today, their countryside has changed. Today, their island has been converted into a gigantic bomber field, a super aircraft carrier anchored off the shores of Fortress Europe. And this is the new battlefront, the air front, from which we seek out the enemy. Not his infantry or his artillery, not his panzer divisions, but the greater menace, the industrial heart of his nation, the foundation on which the Nazi Empire and its armies stand, the power behind the German lust for conquest. The steel mills and refineries, shipyards and submarine pens.
The members of the Sally B Supporters Club. And it takes place with smoke on two of the engines to represent the state in which many B-17s returned from wartime operations. Memorial flight. Degree of cooperation in that role, and one of the very last missions of World War II for the 78th Fighter Group involved escorting Lancasters of number 617 Squadron, who were outbound to bomb Hitler's mounted retreat at Duxford. fledgling Royal Air Force is the Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5A. This being a scale replica. And setting off in hot pursuit, we have probably the most famous of all fighting airplanes on either side in the First World War, the Fokker DR-1, the Dreidecker, the triplane.
If they had a parachute. We were talking earlier on about, we were just talking right now about how the development of fighting aircraft accelerated in such a short space of time.
Yeah.
We're talking 1914, 15, 16. Let's be clear about the difference between a rotary and a radial aircraft, because the radial engine has the cylinders that basically don't move, but the rotary engine, the whole engine moves around, creating this.
Used as they got more experience to really great effect in air combat, using those gyroscopic effects to undertake some incredibly tight manoeuvring. It would have had 110 horsepower, the Renault Oberösel rotary in period, the triplane. This replica has 185 horsepower Lycoming piston. The SE-5A scale replica we see here would have had 200 horsepower from either a Wolseley Viper or a Hispanos replica SE-5A built on the basis of a Curry Watt.
That squadron was taken over by Hermann Goering. Hermann Goering led the so-called flying circus. So the connection to the Second World War is very clear there, isn't it?
Yeah. And this triplane is finished as one of the two aircraft about to come into land, incidentally. The DR-1, as we say, absolutely emblematic of First World War aerial combat. Just 320 of them were built. They suffered serious structural problems in period. And von Richthofen only scored his last 19 victories in DR-1s. Most of them were not sharp in Albatross scouts, high altitude. The low-level capabilities of the Allison Mustang were to be used pretty much right the way through World War II. They were outstanding for tactical control in the lead up to and after D-Day. Airframe with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine was first booted. It really came about as a result of discussions between the Rolls-Royce company pilot Ronnie Harker, who acted as something of a liaison officer between his company and squadrons flying aircraft. The OFMC, Ray and Mark Hanna, of whom we always think whenever we see MH434 flying. MH415, meanwhile, was finally sold by Connie Edwards during the early 2010s, was bought by a group of Australian investors, was restored to fly first in Australia and then at Sywell in Northamptonshire with Air Leasing, and they have done absolutely exquisite. Two splendidly original Spitfires with so much shared history together once more. Sight long thought impossible. Such a surprise to the innovation circuit, and today there was no more. from 1940. In the lead was the world's only two-seat Hurricane in flying condition, operated by Hurricane Heritage, also operated by Aerial Collective for two-seat Hurricane flights from Duxford. Damaged 5 enemy aircraft. And we had P-3717, owned by Jennifer Taylor, which served with number 253 Squadron. Albeit only very briefly. During the Battle of Britain, it was being flown by a Polish pilot officer, WMC Samoinski, among 13 aircraft participating in a scramble over Maidstone from their base at Kenley. An aircraft P-3717 shot down. Two fighters that are shortly going to be representing the Battle of France period getting airborne together. A Curtiss T-36 and a Hawk 75. The de Havilland Vampire FB6. Service just too late to see action in World War II, unlike the Gloucester Meteor, which of course saw some limited frontline service. At purpose on several occasions in recent years, but here comes the single-seater into land. Demonstrated in his usual very elegant fashion by Martin Tesley, the Vampire FB6. Right, well, the next pair of aircraft flying under the call sign Paris formation. In 1940, some of the surviving French Hawks fled to North Africa, where they formed part of the air force of the German supporting Vichy France. Airworthy today that flew in combat with both the Allied and Axis forces during World War. Units of the Armée de l'air de l'Armistice, as the Vichy French. Final pass for the H-75 coming up. And flying over the top of the P-36C, which has just landed in the hands of the Norwegian Rolf Meum. The Hawk 75A1 then coming in to land. Very appropriately given that aircraft's heritage It was flown today by a Frenchman in the form of Patrice Marchasson. Lockheed was used as a support aircraft by the unit and on business relating to the Secret Intelligence Service. It flew several times to France before France fell. But then it was in that hangar at Heston on the 19th of September 1940 when it was damaged by a parachute mine. Absolutely fantastic condition. See wheeling it on there, but we will see the tail drop. You see what I mean about that very nose-high attitude. Ben Cox at the controls of the Lockheed 12A from Fighter Aviation Engineering for us today. On today's bill, we're going to reflect on the fact that it's generally regarded as 80 years ago this year that the Battle of the Atlantic reached its successful conclusion, at least in terms of the main part of those operations. We're going to see in the next slot two of the primary. And then we've got a little way behind it the Fairey Swordfish 1 from Navy Wings, and in close formation with the Swordfish, an aircraft not employed during the Battle of the Atlantic, but nonetheless a notable biplane type from the interwar fleet air arm of the Royal Navy, the Hawker Nimrod.
the Kriegsmarine had invested heavily in submarines. They were attacking our merchant ships, and our vital lifeline across the Atlantic was at risk. And had we lost that battle of the Atlantic, undoubtedly we would have lost the war. Simple as that. And the Catalina was one of the factors of why we actually managed to win that battle. The other factor, well, there were three factors basically. We'd cracked naval.
To go about their activities attacking the North Atlantic supply convoys bound for the UK almost with impunity, hadn't they?
Yeah,
because
that's right.
there had been no aircraft, land-based aircraft with the range long enough to get out there, and accompanied by the Luftwaffe Focke-Wulf Condor maritime strike aircraft.
That's right, and these aircraft were on that mission that today we call seek and destroy. They weren't only looking for where the submarines were, but they were actually attacking them. They would drop mines on them, and they were very successful in that respect too. The Germans actually lost a huge number of submarines. There was a period, a really dark period for the there's a consortium of owners. And the Catalina that we are looking at here has one or two modifications. The fuselage dome-shaped windows are oversized. Because of plans to use this machine as a tourist
Indeed. At Duxford, and it was John Harmsworth and Philip Pettit who flew the Catalina today. But back come the biplanes. Not a formation we've seen before of the Swordfish and the Nimrod.
Counterintuitive, isn't it? You'd think it would be easy to shoot from the sky.
And very, very manoeuvrable at those slow speeds with an extremely small turning radius. We mentioned the attack on the Bismarck in which Catalinas were involved. It was Swordfish from HMS Ark Royal which put a torpedo through the Bismarck's steering gear and enabled the home fleet to deliver the coup de grace.
It was almost the last torpedo, wasn't it? It was the last shot of the action, almost.
But in mentioning the heroism of Swordfish crews, you of course cannot ignore one of the less successful exploits. The Channel Dash 6 Swordfish attempted to stop the German ships, the Prinz Eugen, the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau in February 1942 from going up the English Channel from Brest to their home port at Wilhelmshaven. Those ships were incredibly heavily defended. All 6 of the Swordfish were shot down, but they nonetheless had pressed home their attacks against incredibly heavy fire, and Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond, the commanding officer of the Swordfish involved, was a posthumous recipient of the Victoria Cross. Protection of the Atlantic and Arctic convoys, such a strong role for the Swordfish, often flying off MAC ships, merchant aircraft carriers, which were oilers or grain ships which would have a flat deck welded on top of the hull, a very small flight deck, from the like of which it had never been intended that Swordfish would ever operate, yet they did so, and they did so superbly.
And with limited instrumentation. Today we've got obviously GPS and all that kind of stuff. Well, they're going to be flying these aircraft in terrible conditions in the Atlantic or in the Channel or the North Sea, and if you can imagine yourself in that position, once you've taken off, you'd wonder if you'd ever find the aircraft carrier again.
The rear crewman saluting us all as the aircraft passes by there.
I think she's smiling at that one.
Operating from the Mac ships, the Swordfish could achieve 4 hours endurance as well. As our radial engine formation gets airborne, with the Anson going off first, followed by the 2 Gladiators. Swordfish flying by for the final time above, with a jaunty waggle of the wings. During World War II, Swordfish as Glenn Allison touches down in the Swordfish, we turn to the 3rd aircraft. Before they run in, we've got the 2 Lysanders getting off. It beat off composition from a military version of the de Havilland Dragon Rapide, which you may have flown on with classic wings earlier on. When the Anson first made flight in March 1935, the first Anson 1s in RAF service. And one of those squadrons, number 500 Squadron, stationed at Detling, was involved in some engagements that rather begged belief. On the 5th of September 1939, just 2 days after war was declared, those Ansons had made the RAF's first attack on a German U-boat. They went on flying regular coastal patrols in what were now these rather obsolete aircraft, including over the beaches of Dunkirk. And one of those patrols was going on the 1st of June 1940. The RAF decided to adopt the Gladiator. It entered service with number 72 Squadron in February 1937. It's more powerful than the Gauntlet that preceded it, with a... Alas, as a fighting machine, by the time World War II broke out, this aircraft, rather like the Swordfish we've just seen, was somewhat behind the times. spotted by the black-painted Lysander leading this formation from the Shuttleworth collection, it was in another, more clandestine role that this aircraft perhaps really won its spurs in wartime.
Absolutely right. These aircraft were used by the SOE, or to deliver SOE agents, the Secret Operations Executive. And our image of a Lysander delivering an agent into occupied Europe is a lonely flight across the Channel in darkness to find an isolated field, deliver the agent, and then get away. These are short takeoff and landing known to happen, and very often the local resistance would have to manhandle the aircraft rather than rely just upon the power of the engine to get that aircraft away. Very brave individuals that took part in this, not only the agents, but the pilots as well.
Yes, those pilots of the Special Duties Lysanders, fitted with the big fuel tank and the access ladder that are on the Shuttleworth one here, came from numbers 138 and 161 Squadron, stationed not too far away from here at Newmarket and at Duxford, and they completed more than 400 of those missions in support of the Special Operations Executive from August 1941 through until the end of 1944, long after D-Day.
Yeah, there's a very interesting memorial at Duxford in the barn that was used for the agents for the final kind of inspection to make sure they didn't have any incriminating materials on them in case they were apprehended in France. But there's photographs of some of the agents.
The team leader, Phil Hardesty, calling them all up into a roll. Their displays in a nice tight line of stern formation as they come back from the left. Still calling a rolling left, and the others follow. He calls climbing, and they will again do likewise. And now calling them into echelon right. Time was when you couldn't move on the display circuit for teams of yaks. Some of you rolling out onto the B-axis. The smoke comes on with the two Yak 52s. And there's the final break by the 2023 Flying Comrades. Steve Jones into land there with the Fury. And then, as I say, make your way up to the airspace hangar if you'd like to watch the Concorde nose droop while we have an intermission in the programme. I'm just going to get the latest update from the Flying Display Director, and we'll come back to you very soon as
show you 3 boots. Well, actually no. Got something
Hang on, no boots on.
You're not borrowing mine.
Damn.
It's only so far I go for a lady and then any.
Right, well, the update on the finale to the show is that because of the fact that we'll be running late, we're actually only going to see one of the intended passes by the big wing formation of Spitfires and Hurricanes, but the other elements to it, the Solo Mark 14, which will be opening that sequence, and the very special tribute with which we'll be closing the show with the great Spitfire ML407, will still be on. Andy, a very warm welcome to you. Good afternoon. Very glad to see you. I bet you must have experienced a few times like this when last minute changes have to be made.
Well, that was one of the main roles of Red 10, really, was to smooth the day for the team. They just got to fly aeroplanes, that was easy. Somebody had to be on the ground to make sure that they had the opportunity to take part and when it was going to be.
Of course, the key thing here is that any Red Arrows display requires what's now known as a RAT, a restricted airspace temporary.
Yes, indeed. We drew a circle around the airfield, which was some 5 miles wide, 5,000 feet high. Okay, and that would be, nobody else could fly in that during the display. And 99% of the time that I was doing the Red Arrows displays for 3 years.
Here we'll see that we have 3 shows, full, rolling and flat, and that's all down to weather or airspace. Unfortunately here at Duxford we are restricted by airspace and therefore we can only do a rolling show. However, you'll still see some great formation flying involving all 8 aircraft. Red 1 bringing the team around to the left is squad leader Tom Bold. He is in his 3rd and final year as a team leader. He's also been the synchro leader in 2017. He's also flown the Typhoon operationally. He's a qualified flying instructor on the Hawk, T-Mark 2 and Tucano, where he was the Tucano display pilot in 2010. Get your cameras ready as smoke comes up for the 8 Arrow present. As he rolls the team out, get your cameras ready and watch for the dynamic shape change. As Red 7-8 perform a rollback and change the shape from 8 Arrow into Vixen. You can see all aircraft in Vixen now, and of course if we were a 9 ship, number 9 would be at the back and we would be in our trademark Diamond 9 shape. However, for the entire of 2023 we are only an 8 ship, and that's simply because we can only safely train 3 new pilots each year with the correct level of supervision. However, as I said, next year 2024 is our own Diamond anniversary, and our plan is to be back to our trademark 9 ship, and of course hopefully you will see our trademark Diamond 9 formation as Red. As the team roll to the left, Red 2 on the right hand side of Red 1, closest in is Flight Lieutenant Rich Walker. Rich is in his 1st year on the team, an extremely experienced pilot, having flown operations on both the Harrier and the Typhoon, as well as being a qualified flying instructor on the Hawk T-Mark 2. As I said, 8 pilots in the display. There are 10 pilots on the team. You have Reds 1 through 8 in the display before you. Myself and then 10. On the left-hand side of Red 1 is Red 3. Flight Lieutenant Tom Hansford. Tom is also in his 1st year on the team. He's a former Typhoon pilot and qualified weapons instructor on the Typhoon. This means he would teach all weapon technical information and frontline tactics to the entire Typhoon force. Reds 2 and 3 now smoke as the entire centre section make their way rearwards. And if you can see, that puts Reds 4 and 5 even further back, making it even more difficult for them as we take all our formation references from Red 1 and not necessarily the aircraft that's closest in. And of course, being that far back is extremely difficult for 4 and 5 to see Red 1. This is Eagle, the second of our space-themed shapes, as the smoke comes on for the Eagle present. And 8 roll around the rest of the formation at the start of the tornado. But of course, Red 1 doesn't want to make it too easy for the rest of the team, so watch for the colour change. As the red and the blue come on, Red 1 bends the formation around to the right, even making it even more difficult for Red 7 and 8 to keep that rate. Get your cameras ready for the start of the second half. This is Detonator. Enid breaking first, followed by Hannah. That's Red 6 off to the left, Red 7 off to the right, and Red 8 up over the top. You may hear the tone in that radio. Leaving the infinity symbol in the sky for the infinity break. However, Duxford, it's been an honour and a pleasure. Please put your hands together for the 2023 Royal Air Force Aerobatic Team. It's the Red Arrows!
Show today, our Duxford Big Wing. Big Wing, created by Dr. Farmer, the boss of the 242 Squadron, and by Air Vice Marshal Trevor Powery, the boss of the 12 Group. In a year one, we have several squadrons flying together from the Duxford mixture of Hurricanes and Spitfire. It was felt that this would provide strength in numbers. The tactic was first used on the 7th of September 1940, so the 242 was regular Czechoslovak squadron from American 19 squadron on the Spitfire. That's today the German tactics moved away from their practice on and on to London. The wing was directed by number 11 Group's controllers. The patrol over North Weald in Essex arrived late, having claimed 11 aircraft. at least of the main body of Spitfire. Absolutely gorgeous red and silver Mark 14 from aerial speed icons into the air first. That's the one that'll be entertaining us while the big wing gets here.
Signature act, if we can call it that.
It is, and all the more appropriate for mixing, as did the original Big Wing, Spitfires and Hurricanes, albeit in different proportion to one another than was found in 1940.
They were preparing for
Spitfires and Hurricanes, is that 14 today, or is it more than that now? We'll check.
We have 3 of the 4 Hurricanes, certainly, that we were expecting to see getting underway. And then, of course, we have, as I say, the Mark 14, which is going to be flying solo. And that's going to be the first to roll in 5 seconds from now. I believe we have 13 other Spitfires, but there goes the Mark 14. Post-war number 41 squadron colours. And here they go, the Spitfires and Hurricanes of our 2023 Big Wing on the roll.
These are the Mark 1s. They just like faster. Not really, that's a Fury. That should be as light. Hurricanes around, they've been out for quite a while.
And then we have our 3 Hurricanes in the hands of Mike Collett, James Brown and Matt Pettit.